Welcome everyone to the BDO and Queensland Government Department of Agriculture and Fisheries webinar on establishing business continuity plans for your businesses. Today's webinar is the third in a series of 4 that have been developed primarily to support the food and agri sector. Today's webinar will undertake a deeper dive into the practical approaches and strategies of documenting your business continuity plans. But firstly, my name is Margaux Beauchamp. I'm a partner in the advisory part of BDO in Brisbane. I primarily look after strategy and transformation, which looks after things like strategic planning, looking at optimising businesses and transforming their service delivery models. But more importantly, what today's webinar will be about is about business continuity, disaster recovery and crisis planning. I have with me my colleague Margaux. I'll get Margaux to introduce herself.
Thanks, Marg. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel this being our third webinar and looking through the list of people attending that I almost know everyone by now. But for those that don't know me, I lead BDO's food and agribusiness sector. I've been an advisor to the industry for 30+ years, and I'm currently a non-executive director of Consolidated Pastoral Company, Margaux Farming, and Australian Rural Leadership Foundation. I also own and operate cattle properties in Western Queensland.
Thanks, Margaux. Look, today's webinar agenda, as you can see on the screen, we're going to have a look at the current state of the coronavirus. We always keep you up to date on what's happening there. We're also going to look at some update on the challenges and some solutions from a business continuity context. We're also going to recap webinar 1 and 2 so that everyone, if you are new to the webinar series, and this is your third one, a quick recap of 1 and 2 would be appropriate. We're then hopefully going to get into some really practical things that we're seeing across the industry around some examples around continuity planning. And as always, we'll have a question and answer section at the end of it. So if you are thinking about any questions on the way, please send them through. And at the end of the presentation, we'll do our best to answer those questions that get submitted. So by now, we're all well aware of the increasing number of cases and unfortunate deaths due to COVID-19, both internationally and within Australia. In the media overnight, the number of cases internationally now have reached 2 million across the globe. And within Australia, we're looking at about 6,448 cases as of 8 AM this morning on the 16th of April. We've seen that our government continues its response to reduce the rate of cases, but also to support the economy where it can, and also to protect our borders, both internationally and nationally. Today's webinar, in collaboration with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, is intended to provide you with some real-world examples of continuity responses and have a look at what other businesses are doing and taking in over this period. Post this session, there will be a copy made available of this webinar recording to all the participants, and will be uploaded on appropriate websites within BDO and the Agriculture and Fisheries. Margaux, I might just hand over to you and just give us a bit of an update on your observations around the current state of coronavirus.
Yeah, sure, thanks, Mark. In terms of just explaining what you're seeing, where there may be differences in approach in the different states, we just wanted to make it clear that while the national cabinet makes decisions, it's then up to the actual each of the states to use their legislation and to implement those decisions. And each of the states may also have their own requirements. So, you know, what we're seeing, there may be some variations between the states and territories. In terms of looking at the challenges in the food and agri industry, I thought I'd look at them in terms of the working groups that have been set up through DAF. And we now have we have spoken previously of the 4 working groups. We now have a 5th, which is around for dealing with backpackers, and it's a backpacker and non-permanent resident working group. If I can just turn first to the workplace health and safety, big development there is the release of, since we last spoke, is the release of the Safe Food Queensland guidelines and checklists, and we'll talk further about that there's Queensland Health is are seeking clarification on the use of PPE and vehicle travel. One thing that's still outstanding is just when a positive case does occur in a workplace, Queensland Health is still maintaining that it wants to address it on a case-by-case basis. And obviously there's uncertainty around that approach. In terms of the workforce availability working group, the big development has been the federal government's announcement of visa extensions. There's a job matching service underway with the feds creating a hub to advertise jobs, and Queensland government announcing $500 million for training and job matching. And Grocom has also completed its survey to identify labour demands. In terms of the supply chain, the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning would like to know if there's any input issues as soon as possible. As we've mentioned previously, the PPE and the CO2 and gas issues seem to have been resolved. There is consideration being given to avoid panic buying of fertilisers. Air freight is still a challenge, and Brisbane Airport Corporation would like to receive any information on freight requirements. And also people are urged to register interest on the federal government side. There's also lobbying of the Federal Freight Task Force to make sure Queensland gets its share of subsidised freight. In the whole air freight, while we sort of the focus has been on international freight, we also can't overlook the domestic air freight. In particular, as an example, how do you get seafood from Cairns to Sydney? In terms of sea freight, they're now close to operating at normal levels, and the concern around container freight availability, that seems to be normalising too.
Okay, thanks, Margaux. On your screen at the moment, you can see that there's a number of great resources that have been developed by the Queensland Government around accessing information and around COVID-19 and how your businesses can get access to that information to help put these, I guess, how this information can support your business continuity plans. So please take note of those, and at any time you need to go to those reputable locations to get information as required. Just in relation to the previous webinars, there's a URL on your screen which will give you access to the first two webinars. The first one, which was more about evaluating and refining your business continuity planning, and then the second one is a bit more a practical approach, which had access to a practical documentation and things that you can use now and apply in your business. So recommend, if it is your first time, you haven't seen the other two, that they're worth going back and having a bit of a look at. So just as a recap to bring everybody up to the same speed around where the previous webinars left off. So webinar one, you can see on the screen, we went through a number of areas to consider in your continuity response to COVID-19. These are the areas that we believe that you need to consider and seriously think about in part of your business to manage and navigate through the pandemic. And the first one there is around sustainability, and that's really just thinking through all your critical services and how you can deliver those services in an alternative way during the pandemic period. The next one is a really important focus on your people, and you need to identify and communicate with those critical people during your business and develop plans to ensure that they remain safe and continue to deliver your critical services. Another one which we're going to focus on a little bit today is around health and safety, and Margaux's touched on that. So, and that's really making sure that you have a safe working environment that's meeting the current and emerging, and these things are changing. And we'll be sort of reiterating that today, that this information does change and continuously improve. So to stay on top of that is really important as well. The fourth one there is around technology and how organisations are utilising technology and to really maintain communication and collaboration, but actually help you support and deliver your business outcomes, given all the different directions that's coming out of government. and the supply chain, the last one. This is where you need, and the first webinar does do a little bit of a deeper dive on how you can manage the vulnerabilities around supply chain and the impacts on your business. So webinar 2, that sort of got down into a little bit more, well, what's the practical things that, you know, it's all great that you've got these business continuity plans and 5 key areas I need to focus on, but how do I start capturing and recording this information? And so in webinar 2, we went through some really practical templates, which we've made available in Word documents so that any business at the end of the day can pick them up and start populating them and thinking about some of the responses they want to put in place. So as you can see there, there's about 5 key areas that we went through, and you've got documents for all those 5 key areas that you can start using. And the first one was around processes and understanding the things that your business does, and then trying to put them into which ones are critical and non-critical. And then once you've identified those critical processes, what are the response strategies that you're going to put in place? So how do I put a response in place if a particular process is interrupted? What's my alternate way that I'm going to deliver that service? Event logs, this is really important, and I think Margaux will talk on this a little bit later too, but recording information around what you've done during the pandemic, that's really important, I guess, when you want to access government grants or funds or other stimulus packages where government may require you to have a little bit of evidence. So documenting and having an event of those things is really important. We also touched on contact information and how important that is to have quick, fast, central access to that, and who are the key people in your business that you need to contact. And we also touched on a bit of governance around how does understanding, you know, how your plan fits across your organisation, but more importantly, when things happen, who's the, let's say if somebody gets sick, who's the alternate person that's going to be responsible to maintain that process for you and your business if need be. So that's pretty much where webinar 1 and 2 got to. Today's webinar is a little bit more of an example around taking you through some practical examples around the people element, the health and safety, and Margaux is going to spend a little bit of time looking at the Safe Foods checklist in a minute and the Queensland Health Plan. We'll talk about some practical things we're seeing across the industry around technology, and then also we'll be also touching on supply chain. Also want to sort of acknowledge that, you know, where appropriate, we're trying to give you examples where, you know, these things can be fit for purpose around small to large organisations. So, you know, some areas, you know, you may take a little bit more of a lighter touch given the size of your business, but in other areas you may want to take a bit more of a deeper dive given the depth and breadth of your organisation. So the first one, Margaux, is really about people. So what are the sort of some of the continuity examples you're seeing in across the agribusinesses around people?
Thanks, Mark. Well, one of the first things is people are putting together their response teams and going back, if they had a BCP before, they're going back to that plan and updating it to make sure that it's fit for the current environment that we're in. The other thing, in terms of people, we're seeing lots more communication, and that's you know, putting in place the policies and then making sure that everyone is clear on those policies and continually explaining and reinforcing those messages. So whether that's communication from at induction, whether it's in the morning meetings, putting up lots of signs, if they had say a monthly business newsletter, making that then a weekly, and then even reinforcing it then with video messages to people. We're seeing in terms of people an increased focus of organisation on mental wellbeing. For those agribusiness in remote areas, it's mental illness has been sort of brought to the forefront, but right across the industry we're seeing people paying attention to it. And if companies didn't have assistance programs in place, they're certainly now putting them in place. In terms of whether this falls under accessing work or people, is the alignment of business. We're seeing that with people out of the people in the agriculture industry or the post-farm gate going to service industry to source their labour for the current season.
Thanks, Margaux. That sounds like some really helpful advice there and leveraging off what you're seeing across businesses. The next focus area, I guess, around some practicality that we can put in place around health and safety. One of the main, I guess, processes that people are starting to sort of grapple with is how do they reduce the risk of the COVID-19 cases within their business. And some continuity examples, I guess, are coming out now of Safe Food Queensland. I'll hand it over to Margaux soon, just to go through what some of those Safe Food Queensland checklists look like and how, I guess, businesses can start to implement some of those things. And there's a URL on the screen that you can go to anytime to get access to that checklist and start thinking about how that might impact your business and how you might be able to take those on board and really, I guess, get a head start around managing COVID-19, I guess, the risk of reducing COVID-19 within your businesses. So what I might do now is just hand over to Margaux to take us through a bit of that further.
Sure. If we look at reducing the workforce impact from COVID-19 as a critical process within a BCP, then in filling out the action list, I would urge everyone, whether you are or just regardless of filling it out or not, to have a look at Safe Food Queensland guideline and checklist. This list is being continuously revised, but it is an excellent resource. I'd like to just highlight some of the components in the checklist, and it's divided into sections. The first one is around physical, and the first on the list is around signage, and that's signage first off in terms of when visitors or workers arrive at the site, be it a cattle property or a packing shed or a meat processing plant or businesses in between. For the cattle producers amongst us, then this majority I would expect already to have signage in place as part of their biosecurity, but other businesses may not, and that's an appropriate action to be taken. In terms of facility layout, and that's whether we're talking again a packing shed or a workshop or wherever, it's about making sure that whether it's a production line or workstation, allows for that 1.5 metres apart. When that can't be achieved, and bearing in mind there will be situations where just the configuration of the process line does not allow, or the equipment requirements for people, then people are putting up physical barriers in particular perspex, like what we're seeing in our supermarkets. In terms of common areas, we're seeing people remove excess chairs and table and lunchrooms, so we can make sure that people maintain that 1.5 metres apart. And others are setting up tents just to give more space. Hygiene, I mean, the food industry is already very strong on hygiene, but we're seeing businesses step up a notch in terms of their whole hygiene regime, whether that's hand washing facilities, the cleaning. And around all this is training, refresher training, and just continually giving the message to people. So what we're trying to do is establish a habit. So it's about just continuing continuously reinforcing those messages. In terms of the organisation, the health plan, and we'll talk about that in detail a little later on, but it's also reviewing and development of personnel policies, for example, fit to work policy. And in this case, it's, the policies around include what happens when you have a positive case. Work zones, we're seeing people break up their work environments into work zones and having different teams, and this is going down to having different coloured PPE, so it's very clear which team that individual workers are part of. The other for the food industry is going back and reviewing the food safety program. In terms of personnel, we've talked about communication, and the other is the need to keep records. This will be, in the case of COVID, particularly important should you get a positive case. If you're able to clearly show that you've been adopting all recommended practices, then the impact is likely to be less. In terms of workforce accommodation, we're seeing a lot more spacing of accommodation, where people are, employers are taking a lot more, renting a lot more houses so they can give workers a lot more space. And in terms of that space, that extends to how workers get to and from the workplace. So if it's a minivan, it's having enough space in that minivan.
Thanks, Margaux. The next bit we might focus on in the health and safety section of the business continuity plan is a bit of the health plan. We're going to do a bit of a health plan walkthrough in a minute with Margaux. So, and this is really about if any of your workforce is travelling from interstate into Queensland. There's a whole bunch of requirements around the Queensland border restrictions around entry permit passes that are compulsory that you need to be complied with. And as a sponsoring company, you must be able to submit supporting health plan checklist template to Queensland Health. And this really goes a long way to showing that your company is adhering to the Queensland Government COVID-19 obligations. And as you can see on our screen, we've given you access to the link, which provides you with all the information you need. But now, I guess we'll just have a quick walkthrough of what the health plan might mean for you with Margaux.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. When you turn to this template for the work plan, the way we read it is if you are doing most of the things that were on the things that were appropriate for your workplace that were on the Queensland Health checklist, then filling out the health plan will not be onerous. And I'll just give a couple examples to reinforce that. For instance, it's asking for what are the actions that you've been taken to give employees the appropriate information. So, being able to show that you're inducting appropriately, you've got signage, you're reinforcing those messages with toolbox meetings, etc. The next one is where safe to do so, workers will maintain a distance of 1.5 metres from other workers. And in terms of the actions you might have taken there, the things that we've talked about might have been you've reorganised processes and equipment, you've slowed the production line down, and where machines, where it's not feasible to achieve that 1.5 metres, you've installed perspex.
Okay, thanks, Margaux. So another area of the continuity planning is around technology, and I guess some of the things that we've been seeing across agribusinesses within Queensland anyway is that there's been a greater emphasis on technology and the use of Skype and Zoom and Microsoft Teams to communicate with people. And this isn't just about voice. The video element of this is really important, being able to see people, being able to interact as normally as you possibly can when you would see people on either side of the screen has really been advantageous to maintain that connectivity and social cohesion. The use of technology for remote inspection and monitoring. So we're seeing things like water monitoring, using technology for water monitoring instead of using manual labour force to go out and monitor water. And then I guess within the remote inspections, there's been a greater use of cameras to do those sort of remote inspections across businesses. And so, you know, the use of those technologies has been increased big-fold as far as continuity plans to get to those locations. We've also seen that there's been some, you know, startup companies and other technologies which are coming into the market pretty rapidly to help you with that record keeping more efficiently. And this is really there's technology that's monitoring staff's health and temperatures and location of them on site and where they are. And I guess this is really important around traceability, and that comes back to the point, well, if a staff employee does become exposed or does contract COVID-19, you'd be able to have this technology which will be able to go back through and actually have a look at all the touch points of where that individual's been and then follow back accordingly. And I guess this technology is really supporting, I think, the things that Margaux spoke about with the health plan and the safe food checklist and guideline. So the next one, sorry, Margaux, I'll just introduce that, is the supply chain. And so obviously it's the last part of the continuity planning cycle. And what's some of the practical continuity examples that you're seeing around supply chain?
Sure, Mark. If I can just address them under three headings. First off, in terms of online and takeaway, we're seeing companies that already had a very strong e-commerce platform are very much benefiting from that, and those that didn't, there's an increased focus to get up to speed. The other is fast tracking of a virtual marketplace, and Amazon is working hard on this. And the other big trend in terms of delivery is home delivery. I've got friends in their 90s that are very much welcoming having bread and milk and veggies delivered to their door. They feel like they're going back to the good old days. In terms of access to new markets, we're seeing complementary product bundling, and an example is Beanley rum and Poppy's chocolates, and also companies adding new products for their current customers. And then there's other companies that are looking at opportunities for new product development. So Beanley rum, as an example, going from producing rum to producing hand sanitizers.
Thanks, Margaux. I'd probably prefer Beanley rum to sticking to rum these days through COVID, being stuck at home. But look, that's brought us to the end of our official webinar. We've now moved into the question and answer component of the webinar. And so the first question that's come through is from Pamela in Queensland, and Pamela said, I'm a one-person startup advisor in the ag environmental sector with a focus on stakeholder engagement and collaboration. My business pipeline has all but dried up. How do I stay visible and relevant in this current environment? Margaux.
Pamela, during this time of COVID-19, the business environment has changed significantly, and all businesses should be reviewing their business models to see how they could adapt to suit the COVID world in the short and medium term. The challenge for you, we suspect, is that businesses have been very focused on dealing with the response to COVID-19 and are limiting activity to critical processes. Part of this is due to the fact there's only 24 hours in a day, but also companies, given the level of uncertainty, want to preserve their cash at this point.
Thanks, Margaux. And there's a question that's come in from Jim, who's also in Queensland. Jim wants to know, how can farmers be sure that newcomers to a rural town are not carriers of COVID? when they're not required to self-isolate before starting work on a farm in a different region or state?
Jim, the Queensland Government is currently considering options to implement the federal government's announcement around the extension of visas, which was enacted to ensure agricultural enterprises have the labour pool to meet demand. Currently, a person who lives interstate and works in Queensland and an agribusiness industry is still allowed to travel to Queensland to work without having to undertake self-quarantine, provided both the employee and employer have complied with the requirements set out by the Chief Health Officer. If a farmer was concerned around new workers entering their workplace, they could apply their own provisions to manage the risk of spread of COVID-19, such as requiring employees to self-quarantine prior to commencing duties. There are examples of workplaces doing this already as a proactive measure.
Thanks, Margaux. The next question is from Sue in Queensland. And Sue wants to know, we have expertise in agricultural research and development, for example, doing field trials. Should we concentrate on targeting farmers to attract business, or should we target big corporations? And then how would we do this?
So the majority of research and development in the food and agribusiness industry is undertaken by larger businesses and industry organisations. Without knowing any detail of your product or service, it's hard to give any general advice on marketing. However, I suggest maybe a start is to target one of the industry organisation or a larger company that you see may have a use for your service or product.
Thanks, Margie. You're not going to guess it. The next one's from Queensland, and it's David. And David wants to know, economic recovery will be essential as we emerge from the current situation. How would investment in food and agribusiness be encouraged and supported by the government and or private sector?
David, it's good to see you looking ahead. As we recover, DAF will need to continue to work with industry to identify threats and opportunities which will emerge from the recovery phase as much as during the downturn. In particular, it cannot be assumed that the future will be like the past. There are likely to be ongoing impacts on consumer demand and market structures for some years to come. This work will need to be provided in a tighter fiscal context than at present. However, in relation to the food and agribusiness industry, the government has demonstrated commitment to the sector, identifying it as an essential service. Moving forward into recovery, agriculture has an important role in assisting in the bounce back of the economy, and particularly regional economy. And as such, DAF will continue to work with the industry to mitigate impacts of COVID.
So that's brought us to the end of our questions. I just want to thank everybody for your attendance today. Please contact Margaux or myself if we can assist you or your organisation in relation to your response. BDO will provide a copy of this webinar very shortly, and we'll add it to the appropriate web pages in the coming days. But on behalf of the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and BDO, we'd like to thank you for your time and attendance in today's webinar.